Night Owl and Early Bird by Christopher Denise is a picture book about an early bird that wants to be a knight. The problem is that Night Owl is a night creature and Early Bird is a day creature, so they have to figure out ways to help each other and celebrate their differences. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner and welcome to the Kids Bookshelf. Ahead, we'll explore the book and talk with the author-illustrator about the inspiration behind it. Christopher Denise is the award-winning creator of Night Owl, which was a Caldecott Honor winner and a #1 New York Times bestseller. He's illustrated many other critically acclaimed children's books as well, including Groundhog Day and Firefly Hollow. And he joins us to talk about his second book to feature Night Owl. This one is Night Owl and Early Bird. Christopher, welcome to the Kids Bookshelf.
Thanks so much for having me. I am delighted. I love your show.
Well, this is the second book to feature the character of Night Owl. Tell us about the inspiration for this character.
Well, Dan, I had been working on this story about a little bird, and this bird was a crow. And this little crow stayed up all night. So he was sort of a night owl. And I continued working on the story, and eventually that crow became an owl. And I got it to a place that I thought it was pretty good, but you never know until you test it out. So my test market is my family, of course. And it was a Friday evening, and I went into the kitchen from the studio, and I shared it with my family. They were all there, of course, making pizza, which made it into the book. And I pitched my story, and they didn't like it. They didn't think it was funny. They didn't think there was enough to it until our middle daughter, Isabel, asked the magic question. Now, this is a question that I think can unlock potential in any creative endeavor, whether you're writing a story or you're crafting a series of images. And that question was, what if? And she went further to ask, what if the knight was an owl? And right then, I knew that we had a story that was worth telling. I grabbed my iPad, I created 2 pages of sketches, and that became the basis for the entire story.
And this story is, as you point out, it's the night owl, and it's medieval in its setting. So I'm curious about, did you have to do a little research to, get that architecture right that you wanted to include in the book?
Of course, yeah. I mean, I spent many years growing up in Ireland, and so castles were part of, my youth. I mean, exploring castles. And then, of course, while we were living in Ireland, we traveled a great deal. And like most kids that were, 7 to 10, I was fascinated with castles. And it gave me a chance to dive back into old family photographs, as well as diving into the research, which was not new for me because I had studied art history and archaeology before attending Rhode Island School of Design.
Well, as we mentioned, this is the second book to feature Night Owl. This is Night Owl and Early Bird. Tell us about the plot here in this book.
Well, Owl worked so hard to become a knight. And I thought, what happens when your main character gets everything they want? Where do you go from there? And I thought about Owl in the castle. With all this responsibility, he's got a big job, he's very important, but really he's just a kid. And I think he had forgotten some of that. And I wanted to introduce a character that was going to shake that up and change things for him. And I had also had a small sketch that I produced during the first Night Owl book. And that sketch showed Owl outside at night with a torch in the snow, and there were footprints in the snow. And I went back to that sketch and I asked myself questions, very much like my daughter did. I asked questions like, why is Owl outside at night with a torch? Who made those footprints in the snow? and where do they go? And that suggested a story to me, and that introduced Early Bird.
Well, to give us a sample of the book, would you read just a small portion for us?
I'd love to. Just before dawn, he sat in his room and ate his dinner. It was the same every night. Until early one morning, when Owl was drifting off to sleep, someone or something started making a great deal of noise. Hi, are you awake? My name is Early Bird. I'm your biggest fan. I want to be a night owl just like you. You can teach me everything. I'm a super duper learner. I know that I could be a night owl. Look how big my eyes are. Do we stay up all night? What is your cape for? When do we start? Are there snacks at work? I cannot teach you to be a knight right now. I am too tired, Owl said as he rolled over. So Early Bird kept herself busy in one way or another. She was very busy and very noisy all day long.
Well, this book is about two characters that are very different. Night Owl, of course, being a night creature, Early Bird being a day creature, and those two things sort of clash. So part of the message, as I see it in this book, is learning to get along, or to how to work together and kind of celebrate those differences.
Absolutely, and whether it's people that we work with, or perhaps it's a younger sibling that you have to figure these things out with, or perhaps it's a friend who's not exactly like you, but in many ways can help bring out the best in you.
I'm talking with Christopher Denise about Night Owl and Early Bird, and our conversation will continue. If you're enjoying this discussion, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. And thank you. So this is a picture book, so sometimes this is going to be read by adults to children. So do you keep that adult audience in mind as well? Because, if a parent doesn't like the book, it's not going to be read that often.
I do. I try to create many layers of the story. So the one of the great things about being an illustrator and an author for any given book is that when you're working as an author, you're telling the story, okay, with the language. But when you're working as an illustrator, you're also telling the story. You're just using an abstract language. So I try to create a parallel emotional narrative with the language of the pictures. And I try to include in that narrative details that I think that the parents will enjoy in terms of the expressions of the characters and foreshadowing and hints about the story. Also, those can be picked up by younger readers. But I do try to keep the parents in mind in a very specific way. Not all of us are trained as librarians and teachers. And we've all heard librarians and teachers read picture books masterfully. But I wanted to construct the book in such a way that even if you're not a pro, if you're a new parent, that the way that we've built the text allows for an easier read aloud so that it's a more pleasurable experience for you and hopefully for your younger reader.
Your illustrations I found lots of fun, especially, I read the story several times, and each time I'd start to notice some of the foreshadowing you were talking about. There's a spread in the book where you see on the floor there are these little toy wolves and toy knights, and that foreshadows a scene that's going to come up later. And also there's some books that were stacked on the floor, and one of them was The Virtue of Sleep. And this owl is trying to get some sleep, but Early Bird is interrupting that.
There was also a title called Tales of Daring Do. That is really so much fun for me to include those details. And it's not essential to the story, but for the attentive reader, whether they're young or old, hopefully they add some texture and depth to that. And it just makes it really, really fun.
And it adds that layer that if you didn't catch it the first time, since kids like to have books read over and over again, then maybe the child or the adult starts to notice those extra details in your illustrations.
Right. If I can give a little something extra for that parent that's reading it for the 20th time, something for them to enjoy and, get a little chuckle out of, then I call that a win. That's great.
What is it you enjoy about writing for this age group?
Oh gosh, it is really just the endless possibilities. Um, and then once you do start to settle in on something, it is that world building aspect, the details that you can include to flesh out a world that feels real. Of course, this is set in medieval times, but it's really more vague. It's sort of the time of yore. It's not really specific, but I can include all of these interests of mine in this, and then create a world for them to dive into. And then I can also, of course, play with really fun read aloud language.
So, as you mentioned earlier, you're both writer and illustrator. And as you know, being an illustrator, often there's an author and an illustrator, and they work separately with just maybe an editor as a go-between. But since you're both, do you feel like that gives you a creative advantage?
Well, the key thing that you mentioned there, Dan, is the editor. And it would be impossible for me to overemphasize the importance of the work that Christy Ottaviano does on these books. Because she really helps me find the story, helps me craft the story, every single word and comma and all the pacing notes, all of those things are worked over for countless hours with Christy. And it helps because you have that extra person. Sometimes if you're doing it all yourself, it can be very difficult to have perspective. When you're working as an illustrator, you're just responding and trying to tell the story. And that can be a challenge when you're both creating the language and the pictures. Of course, one of the advantages is that you can overwrite, as I tend to do, and then you can decide, I don't need all of that language. I can show some of that. So it's always that question that Christy helps me with. Do I show or do I tell?
Oh, this is the second book to feature Night Owl, and it's a charming story. Do you see more adventures with Night Owl in the future?
Of course. And I think it really comes down to the fact that there's more story to tell. That idea that writers talk about when a character begins to speak to them, that was foreign to me until I discovered this world. And there are more stories and more adventures to be had with this character. Absolutely.
Well, this current book is Night Owl and Early Bird. It's by Christopher Denise. Christopher, thank you very much for talking with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a delight.
If you'd like to purchase Night Owl and Early Bird, I've placed a link for you in the description below. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more books you might find interesting. Thank you for watching this edition of the Kids Bookshelf. I'm Dan Skinner. Until next time, keep sharing the gift of reading.